ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you here at Villa Mounier on behalf of the Geneva Human Rights Platform to this side event to the 50th session of the Human Rights Council on rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. This event is being organized and co-sponsored by the permanent missions of Afghanistan, Spain, Australia, Canada, Switzerland, as well as UN Women, the Center for Dialogue and Progress in Geneva, and the Geneva Human Rights Platform, and the International Service for Human Rights. It's a pleasure welcoming you to this event. You know that the side events cannot be at the UN Palais des Nations at the moment, so it's a pleasure for us at the Geneva Human Rights Platform to partner with all of you, and thank you very much for having approached us for that, to have that joint activity and event on the topic at hand, which of course is a very timely side event. With the urgent debate coming up on the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan in the Council, it's just the right moment for us to have this discussion. We have a very complete panel today online and here with us in the Cassese room of Villa Mounier. Thank you very much for being here. We have also, let me announce that also to the participants online, there will be interpretation. So in the Zoom setting, you can click and choose the languages to have interpretation for the event. So with this, actually, if I could invite you, Ambassador, for the introductory remarks. Thank you again very much for this collaboration, and over to you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much. You're speaking well, loudspeakers. I would like also to take the opportunity to thank all the organizers of this side event here today. You named them. I will not repeat that, but I will say that the mission of Spain has been the first and the original supporter. When it started together, and then certainly others joined in this. And I really also thank you, Phil, for the International Service for Human Rights, because that was also a force behind everything, including the urgent debate. And I'm really grateful for all the ambassadors, extensive ambassadors of Spain, Australia, Canada, and Switzerland, that they allowed me to speak on behalf of the basically everyone. We don't want to take time, but all of us will have a couple of minutes introductory remarks. I just wanted to welcome you all here. It's a great pleasure for us. The situation in Afghanistan, especially the situation of women's rights in Afghanistan, as the High Commissioner during her report at the beginning of this council mentioned, is the worst anywhere in this planet Earth. I think if you look at anywhere in the world, what's happening to the women in Afghanistan, and that's in contrast to what was the situation, and now you will also hear from this excellent panel that we have. And I think, despite whatever discussion in the council, that there is a report by the High Commissioner, there has been sufficient discussion. You will say, no, there was no sufficient discussion on Afghanistan, and especially for women's rights. And that's why the urgent debate was needed. I'm glad that ultimately, in this little time that we all had, we pulled it together. I thank the sponsors and co-sponsors, everyone who came together to make this urgent debate possible. Putting the spotlight, I think, on women in Afghanistan is perhaps the least we could do here. And that's the least. I'm not saying having a debate in the Human Rights Council will solve the problem of women in Afghanistan. And you will hear from each and every person here also from the panelists. But at least our job here is to keep the spotlight on this situation and keep the women in Afghanistan, the situation of women in Afghanistan, women's rights at the center of our debate and discussion. If not now, I would have been really disappointed. But if it was not now, when it would have been the time to have an urgent debate on the situation of women in Afghanistan. I am also really grateful to this great panel of Afghan women leaders from different walks of life, from different, representing a diversity of Afghanistan at the same time, and also coming from with a very strong background within the country to be here, because we really literally have to pull them from different places around the world and coming here in such short notice. So I'm really happy. Thank you. Thank you all. But my last point is that What a contrast. The contrast cannot be more stark than what it is today. Today, literally, in this day, in Kabul, there are around 3,500 men, not only men, religious scholars, quote unquote, are gathering to talk about everything else, about me, about youth, I'm kind of young, about different communities of Afghanistan, about different walks of life, diplomats, it doesn't matter who you are. So in a specific community of 3,000 men are talking about everyone. And when they were asked, what about women? I'm sure some of you saw it. Reuters quoted that it's okay, the women are our mothers and our sisters, we are entitled to speak on their behalf. And the contrast is here, we have a room full of some very active women in our past to talk about their rights. I know it's not sufficient at all to talk about the women's rights in Afghanistan from Geneva. We have to push this to Afghanistan, but at least the platform that we have right now is here. And that's why I'm really grateful to everyone. I promise that I will talk very little and give the whole time and spotlight for a woman. And with this, I'll thank you very much.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Afghan women and girls, the people of Afghanistan are experiencing some very difficult times. I wish to offer my sympathy and condolences to the people of Afghanistan for the deadly earthquake on the 22nd of June and the aftershock on 24th of June. These events highlight the need for intensified humanitarian aid and other support to address the suffering of those affected. After 20 years of conflict and almost 11 months since the takeover by the Taliban in August last year, the country has been plunged into a deep economic, social, humanitarian, and human rights crisis. I visited Afghanistan in March this year and met with representatives of the de facto authorities. I also met with some astonishingly strong and impressive women, including doctors, journalists, civil servants, and civil society members, to discuss the scourge of gender discrimination and inequality in the country. I listened to their concerns and demands of the Taliban and the international community. They told me, we want to speak to the Taliban ourselves. We know what our people need, not only in the city, but also in the countryside. And we have authoritative information and solutions to raise with the Taliban ourselves. I am happy to note that the voice of Afghan women is well represented in the event today. I salute their courage and resilience to discuss what they see as their priorities for Afghanistan and to ensure that women are part of each decision-making process that impacts their lives and that of the country. The international community needs to stand with every Afghan woman and girl and echo their demands to have a seat at the table. I call on the de facto authorities to honor their commitment to women's rights, to urgently create a meaningful dialogue with Afghan women, and to listen to their voices. The Taliban are not keeping its promises to the Afghan population, especially women and girls, nor to the international community. The ban on secondary schooling for girls, directly affecting more than 1.2 million secondary school girls, continues to deprive them of a future and their dreams. I call upon the de facto authority to set a firm date for schools to be open to girls and to ensure quality education and resources for teachers. During the last month, several decrees have been passed directly restricting women's and girls' rights. The enforcement of a strict hijab rule continues. Barriers are in place for women's access to employment. There are no opportunity for women to participate in and the political life, and their freedom of movement has been severely restricted. Today, we see a systematic policy of discrimination against women and institutionalized oppression of women, aiming to make women invisible in society and excluded from public life. We cannot fail the women and girls of Afghanistan as they face the reintroduction of the discriminatory policies and repression they faced under the Taliban 2 decades ago. We must, together with Afghan women in the lead, support and take all measures needed to ensure that their rights are protected. We must provide Afghan women and girls with moral and financial support to continue to fight for equal rights for women and girls. We must ensure that humanitarian aid distribution is gender sensitive and inclusive, and is conducted with the indispensable participation of women humanitarian workers. We must commit to strong advocacy for women's and girls' rights as part of any engagement with the Taliban. Afghanistan's future will depend on the talents and capabilities of its women. Afghan women have demonstrated their capacity and competence in building the society from ruins of the war. They cannot be excluded from Afghanistan's present or future. The Taliban need to be reminded that upholding and defending women and girls' human rights is a basic requirement for any fair and just society and for wider recognition and acceptance in the international community. I thank you.
Good afternoon, Excellencies and colleagues. Thank you all for being here today for this important event for us to all have a deeper discussion on the human rights situation of women and girls in Afghanistan and to propose recommendations for effective action by the Human Rights Council, particularly ahead of tomorrow's urgent debate. As the High Commissioner has already recognized in her oral update of the 15th of June, sustainable peace in Afghanistan requires listening to the voices of women and girls and ensuring their participation and representation in all policy and decision-making processes. And we are committed to ensuring that women and girls from Afghanistan are able to access and participate in the decision-making that happens at the Human Rights Council as well. We heard from Shahrazad Akbar, the former chair of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, during the interactive dialogue, that we will judge the international community by its deeds and not its words. And with that, I open today's panel, this highly esteemed panel, which I am really honored to be moderating today. Just by way of introduction, on my left onwards for alphabetical order, we have Dr. Alia Yilmaz. She's the assistant professor in Suleiman Demirel University. Mrs. Fawzia Kufi, who is the former deputy speaker of Afghanistan's National Assembly. Ms. Nimbila Musleh, the former deputy minister in Afghanistan's Ministry of Women's Affairs. We have Ms. Seema Ghani, am I right? Shukriya, sorry. Oh, online. Seema Ghani, who's online, chair of Hand in Hand Afghanistan. Shukriya Barakzai, the former ambassador of Afghanistan in Oslo, and Shagul Rezai, the member of Parliament and National Assembly of Afghanistan. And I believe Ms. Nilofar Ayubi will also be joining us shortly. We will also be joined by UN independent experts, Mary Lawler, the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, Melissa Upreti, who is a member of the UN Working Group on Discrimination Against Women, and Ms. Vandana Rana, who is a member of CEDAW and the Country Rapporteur on Afghanistan. So welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today. We will start with opening statements from our panelists, 2-minute opening statements to focus on the context and the current situation and the current realities. Perhaps I can take the comments in reverse order, starting from the end of the panel onwards.
Okay, thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I appreciate all organizer to invite for this important meeting, especially Mr. Ambassador Andesha. Today we are here to talk about Afghanistan, a country where women as half of population are eliminated from the society and political and social activities and deprived of all their human rights and civil rights. Despite repeated promises of Taliban, school doors are still closed. The humanitarian crisis is serious. Opposing voices are severely suppressed and the failed trial continues. In some areas such as Balkhab district, Panjshir and Andhra, where the Taliban are entering the huge number of military strength, there are horrific reports about mass killings, beheadings, and shooting of civilians, even women and children. Due to the disconnection of communication networks and the lack of access to human rights institutions and media to these areas, we are deeply concerned about the occurrence of war crime in those areas. We expect Human Rights Council to prevent and investigate the mass killing and war crimes and violation of human rights in Afghanistan. We think that whatever happened in last days in Balkhab district or in last months in Panjshir was a war crime. Currently in Afghanistan, there is neither constitution nor other laws that define citizen rights and their relationship with the ruling regime. In some provinces, people are forced to displace every day because of their ethnic affiliation and their lands and homes are usurped. According to universal indicators, there is no government in Afghanistan now. A strongly monopolistic group, unlike all human rights norms, has monopolized the power by resorting to force and violence. You know, women of Afghanistan are now in their most difficult stage of their struggles. Like the rest of the world, Afghan women have gone through long struggles for justice and equality. The history of women's struggles in Afghanistan is the glorious voice of the struggle for justice and human living. We have come up and down in a very difficult way to stabilize the position and presence of women in Afghanistan. But at the end of the day, we unexpectedly return to a 0 point after a long struggle. Going back to a 0 point is not easy. It is bitter and grueling after a long struggles. 0 point means that in the part of the world on Kabul streets, women fight for bread, work, and freedom, but women's voices are responded with flagging and violence, prison, and torture. The history of women's struggle will remember that the past 10 months, Afghan women went to prison and were tortured for their most basic human rights, and ultimately, the Afghan women's voices silenced on Kabul streets. How can be the concept of real political and presence of women in the world defined when in the part of the world in Afghanistan, women are deprived of all their human rights and civil rights? So the question is that where are now in Afghanistan, we are in a difficult situation. Some people think we will have an independent parts. We will divide Afghanistan as an independent country. And some people think the war is the only solution for Afghanistan. And some people think the solution is to go to an inclusive political process. How can we manage this different idea? I think this is the time for all international community, as we all things that we had in 20 years, it was a common achievement from Afghan people and international community. And failure are the common as well. We should accept that after 20 years, we are where we were 20 years ago. So it is not easy for Afghanistan. That is why in this difficult situation, we invite all who believe in justice and human rights that stand with Afghan people, especially for Afghan human rights and women's rights. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I don't know from where I should start. So I'm talking from my heart. I try to represent those voices which is you may not heard. I try to represent the gender which is being right now in the situation of gender apartheid because the circumstances in my country. I'm trying to represent those women which is their voices was been silent. They will be taking in a presence just because they would like to ask and seek for their justice. I'm talking on those whom just because of their gender, they are not allowed to go for work. They cannot earn the bread to feed their kids. I'm talking about the country, which is last year this time, we all proudly happy our achievements with the name of democracy, justice, human rights, women's rights. Where we are today, we are the one, wantedly or unwantedly, give a diplomatic floor to the terrorist group, legitimizing them by signing the Doha Agreement and believe on them, where constantly they were killing innocent women, men, and children in the last 20 years. I think the Afghan people doesn't deserve to be controlled or lead by a terrorist group with the name of Taliban. As far as I had the legitimate rights to represent my country as a former member of parliament, I would say Taliban are not representing Afghanistan. Neither our religion as a Muslim, neither our history and geography, or the beautiful ethnicity and the diversity of my country. They are just representing, on the behalf of all those 20 international terrorist networks, which is they're actively working and ruling in Afghanistan. I just would like to say, we have to keep in our mind, if we open the door for friendship and legitimacy with the Taliban terrorist network, then you should be prepared for any other terrorist network groups to rule the governments or challenge the global security. Taliban are not a joke, and they are not the only reality in Afghanistan. We, the people of Afghanistan, we are the reality. We, the women of Afghanistan, we are the reality. Be our voice, believe us, and please, according to international laws, rules, regulation, stand with us. Do not give legitimacy to the Taliban. They don't deserve. Right now, we are not only facing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, which is for some international organization, it's a good excuse to build a kind of contact or engagement with the Taliban. Nobody's talking about the political crisis. Nobody's talking about where is the people of Afghanistan? Do we elect or select the Taliban to rule? No. Is anyone asking us, would you like the Taliban to be back in power? No. Why we should pay the price? So few things are important. I hope that should be considered. Political legitimacy that only should come from the people of Afghanistan. If it's inclusive government, if it's a republic or whatever shape and form, the people of Afghanistan needs and should be a decision maker for their today and future. And the second, it's very important to do not play a normalizing relationship with the Taliban. It's really sad. As a woman, we were fighting, I myself, for 24 years. I lost my kids during the Civil War. I've been targeted for suicide attack. They did assassinate on me in 2014. And still I'm alive as a survivor. I'm asking you, the life I paid, the time I give, it shouldn't be for nothing. It was for values, common values we believe. It's for those goals we would like to achieve in the name of humanity. So I'm urging you, it's time to stand with the people of Afghanistan, with no one else. It's the time to recognize the very legitimate civilized movement inside of Afghanistan with the name of Women's Resistance Force, and also other military resistance, because someone should take some action. I'm not supporting any kind of war or anything generally, but the time comes for me to take a decision. Shall I let the entire 35 or 37 million people to be hostage by Taliban, or I should work to free them and release them from a prison with the name of Afghanistan as they are right now? I will choose the second. I will love to fight for freedom, equality, and justice. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Ambassador, and all colleagues for organizing such an event, and I'm glad to be here. A few years back, I was here to report on the achievement of the Islamic government of Afghanistan at that time on human rights issue, UPR session. So I prepared a long report of what has been achieved so far. But unfortunately, today I'm here to report that we have lost everything in Afghanistan. However, what happened on August 15th last year is a tragedy for human rights in every aspect of social, political, and economic. A terrorist group was originally whitewashed before deciding to take over and demolish 2 decades of hard work by all Afghan people with the backing of international community. Whatever progress was achieved, it has been lost. In contrast to expectations, the Taliban have changed. We are witnessing that they have not changed at all. In the last 10 months of holding the absolute political power in all parts of Afghanistan, they have demonstrated that they have not evolved and have become more aggressive against all, notably other ethnic groups like Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks. The worst elements of one ethnic group is in full political power, and they say that they have fought against international community, and now they have the power to decide on the fate of Afghan people. I personally think that Taliban has been brought from centuries back to now under the name of religion. They claim that they have fought, and now it's their time to rule the Afghan people in Afghanistan. A few Talibs from other ethnic groups who fought with them in the name of jihad, they have somehow, through division of power, they have left them. They have started to fight between themselves against the other groups. And many of them, they have been replaced by other followers, which is coming from one ethnic group. The bad news is that girls' schools are closed, while Taliban's own children are enjoying quality education abroad. They have restricted women's mobility in Afghanistan, while their own families are living a prosperous life in outside of Afghanistan, in different parts of the world. Women have lost, as my colleagues mentioned, they have lost their careers, financial resources. Poverty has increased. 90% of Afghan people are living under poverty line nowadays, and the majority of them, of course, women and girls. In no other Islamic countries, this way of rules are being used for women. No schooling, full coverage, no rights for education, work, and access to health services. Women are being used as child production machines. Women are not even seen as human beings by them, forgetting the human rights factors. Taliban have recently published posters in the city of Herat and Kandahar saying that when women are not fully covered, they are like animals and meant to behave accordingly. The question is why we were traded to a terrorist group and its supporters so easily. Why our international allies have to turn a blind eye and give ears to what is going on in Afghanistan in the name of religion. Genocide against Tajiks and Hazara is ongoing. The current day-to-day news of Afghanistan is explosion, forced displacement, abduction, and assassination of innocent people in all parts of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Afghanistan is once again becoming a safe haven for various terrorist groups. According to the Guardian articles, Al-Qaeda is being revived and plan more complicated terror attacks against nations. So that's for now, and I will add later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the sponsors and co-sponsors, all the friends of Women of Afghanistan, and thank you for dedicating your time to come and listen to the women of Afghanistan. I think in addition to the important people who have joined, we have also some women who have joined us from Kabul. And some women who are in person from Afghanistan. We have Khanam Yari, Nigina Yari, who I think recently came from Kabul, but we also have some people from the women protesters who have joined. I also want to thank the countries and the organizations who have pursued it in the last weeks or so, the inclusion of an urgent debate on the situation of women and girls of Afghanistan. And I thank the HRC High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet and the member states for agreeing to include this important discussion. If it was not included, we are already very, very disappointed and, as you know, almost traumatized that with another awful war that's going on in Ukraine, Afghanistan, and especially the women of Afghanistan are being either abandoned once again or forgotten or no longer making the headlines. So we are very grateful for all your efforts. I know there are a couple of people in this room who personally made their efforts to make this possible, but also make the urgent debate possible. You know that people, these women came from different parts of the world. Some also who will be speaking joined us from Kabul. You have been hearing about women and Afghanistan and women of Afghanistan in the last, I think, 4 decades or so. I know that there are some friends and diplomats who have this perspective that, you know, for how long shall we continue to bring women of Afghanistan to these capitals to speak about their problems? We often forget that, you know, our problem, the problem of women in Afghanistan is dependent on the global problem. It is not only the problem of women in Afghanistan, but it is the problem that we have been in the last 4 decades in the forefront of that, trying to protect the liberties and freedoms that we all deserve, no matter where, in which part of geography in this globe we live. But most often, I think our struggles are either being undermined or being regarded as we are too progressive, or we do not represent this part of Afghanistan, or we do not represent that part of Afghanistan, or our demands are so high. Sometimes, honestly speaking, to the women in the villages, which we do very, very often, and I also come from a village, I think they are much more progressive than I am, honestly. I was traveling to different villages and remote areas in Afghanistan, and you will be surprised to know, because I think most often it's said that the progress in the last 20 years are only localized to the cities. But I have been traveling, like many of these wonderful ladies, to the villages. I remember that in one of my trips to a village, which it's very hard to travel by car. You can just take donkey or horse to travel there. And I took a donkey and horse to travel there. During a breakfast, one of the ladies, this is like 6-7 years back, one of the ladies was asking me that, so who finally became the president of United States? Was it Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama? And it was really like, seriously? Are you following even that? This was a progress that Afghanistan has achieved. So we are not only talking about the number of schools that were built, the number of health clinics, but we are talking about a transformed generation that is now left in the middle of nowhere. It's not only the woman, but everyone that is living in Afghanistan. They are left in uncertain future because of the wrong politics of some of the politicians in Afghanistan. We take the first responsibility as a politician, but also global community, because we just underestimated the problems. And now Afghanistan, after 15th of August, a country that 28% of members of its parliaments were women. 30% of civil servants in the civil servant organizations were women. Out of 11 million children that went to school, 40% were girls. You name this, all these figures. I'm not saying we didn't have problems. I'm not saying corruption was not there. I'm not saying we didn't have to struggle against lack of rule of law. All of these problems were there. We were constantly raising our voice about these problems. But what I'm saying is that there was a functioning system, that women were enjoying some level of rights and liberties within the principles of international instruments and principle of Islam. But all of a sudden, everything, we have to go back to scratch and to zero. Now, 0% of women in the parliament, 0% of women in civil servant. 2 point something, High Commissioner Bachelet mentioned about 1 point something. We don't have accurate data because the practices are so different from one province to other when it comes to girls' education. But almost even the girls who go to school, they go under extremely difficult circumstances because the environment is very intense for them. And those who don't go to school, you can imagine. It's very easy to talk about it, but it's very difficult. As a mother, I can understand their pains of those who start their day and they tell me, I don't want to get emotional because sometimes I do get emotional very quickly. They tell me that they start their day by looking at the window of their house and they end their day by looking at the window and doors of their house. Nothing else to do. Literally every woman in Afghanistan is under house arrest. And we think it's okay because Taliban are claiming that women must enjoy the Islamic rights. What Taliban do, in fact, under the name of Islam is in contradiction with Islam. In Islam, the first verse that came to our Prophet, peace be upon him, was Iqra, means read. Reading and writing was the first thing that Islam was enlightened about. So how come Taliban deprive 55% of the society under the name of the same religion? If you look at Qatar, which is the country that Taliban had their office, they have 12% more girls into their education institutions than boys. How come we are not even talking about this, the impact of depriving women from, from social life, how it can impact security. We're just talking about simple things. How can it impact our economy? Our economy that we were hoping to be prosperous, standing on their own sustainable economy. Now we go back to zero location, giving people 1 bag of flour and 1 can of oil. As somebody who all of us invested our not only time, but invested our blood in Afghanistan, it is painful for us. We take the responsibility for what went wrong in Afghanistan, but we also urge you to stand and don't take that this is okay for women of Afghanistan to face that circumstances. It is not okay. It is not part of our culture. It's not part of our religion. No matter where you go. In fact, today from Kandahar, one of the provinces where Taliban first started, we have a man who is education activist. He travels from villages to the villages, campaigning for girls' rights. That is a transformed Afghanistan. We need to listen to them. Don't let a minority inequality to rule Afghanistan. We are not saying that, you all pick up the guns and fight against Taliban. What we are asking you to use all the levers you have, which I don't know how much levers actually the West has anymore, given the circumstances. I know Phil is laughing, but given the circumstances, I think you have very little lever. Use that to pursue a political dialogue. A political dialogue which, as a result of which, there is a government accountable to the people of Afghanistan and is in power based on the will of the people of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Ms. Nilofar Ayubi.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your efforts. Thank you for bringing us together. I think it's very, very crucial for us to be in the panel and speak about Afghanistan. As diverse as you can see this panel, and you can see from age-wise, from ethnicity, from political background, or from the experience-wise, you have all of us from each generation. And this means that, and when you see all of us echoing the same message, it means that we are the face of Afghanistan. We are the reality of women of Afghanistan. And you should take this to account. When you talk about Afghanistan, when you talk about Afghan women and future of Afghan women, we are here, just 1% of the example which we have in the country, inside the country. Also, if you go back to the 10 months, 11 months of resistance of women in Afghanistan, who stood in front of the patriarchy and in Taliban, who accepted torture, prison, they accepted to be killed, but they resisted. And they prevented the Taliban to be recognized. And these are the women we are talking about. While the men, I'm so sorry, failed us, but the women stood firm. We are fighting inside and outside of Afghanistan. We are fighting all around the world. I am leaving my 3 kids and traveling around only for the women of Afghanistan because they want each one of us to echo their message. And today I am here with a very clear message from the women protesters who are waiting for support, for help in Pakistan, inside Afghanistan, who has been forgotten, unfortunately, that they are not happy with what's happening. They do not want to leave the country. They do not want to be forced to leave their homelands, but they are. And now that they are forced to be in the neighboring countries, they're in a very, very bad situation. Okay, if we cannot go directly to a political solution, at least we can start from here. They're not very big in number. There are only maybe 100 of them. But if we can't, if the EU, if the West cannot help them, then how are we supposed to ask the West to help the 35 million people of Afghanistan? As you can see, since 10 months when the Taliban has taken, girls aren't going to school. I'm not going to details because all of my peers have mentioned the point. But I will like to pressure on the ethnic cleansing, the genocides which are happening against minorities, against people of other languages or other ethnicities. We can see that what's happening right now when I'm sitting here, we have been hearing news from Balkh that a genocide is happening. People have been forced to flee their homes. The Panjshir, what's happening in Panjshir, it's not hidden. It's everywhere in the news and it's shared every day. We have seen that they have not kept their promise of national amnesty. Each day we hear at least 2 or 3 deaths or killings or murders of our national army security forces, those who are in the police. Also, we have seen them being cruel to the women. We still don't know where is Alia Azizi. There are some women who are missing. Our women protesters who went to prison and they were tortured and they're still now in Afghanistan. They have again taken 2 of our girls, which I cannot name them. These girls have been in their prison for 30 days, tortured, broken bones. And then now again, when they try to leave the country, they were captured and they're again going through the same torture. But I'm not allowed to take their names because they have been warned. And I cannot risk that. So here today, I would like to request that please, we can go to as many conferences as much possible. We can speak as much as it's possible, but it's enough of speaking. We want actions. To be honest, I am quite hopeless. Every day when a decree is announced by Taliban, I feel a little bit more broken because I see that we are fighting, we are screaming, we are shouting, we are begging literally that please listen to us. Don't legitimize Taliban. Please have travel bans, restrictions on Taliban officials, but none of that is happening. In fact, Tom West is working on releasing the funds to the Taliban, not the people of Afghanistan. And this is not fair. That fund, that money is from the people of Afghanistan. The same way the earthquake which happened, the natural disaster, a huge amount of money has been flowing in the name of AIDS, but none of that is reaching to the people. We need to stop that. If you are going to send your taxpayers' money, at least you need to have a monetizing mechanism at least. You also owe that to your own people. So this is what we are asking. I very much believe in dialogue because at this point, I don't see any other solution. And I think there needs to be very strict rules or restrictions or sanctions on Taliban so they are forced to sit on the table and hear us. As you can see, they are holding a jirga today, but you do not see any women there. When they are asked that why no women are there, they say their husbands and sons are there, so that's enough. So this should be a clear message that women are just a child-making machine, a housemaid, and that's all. It doesn't mean anything to them. So I urge you all, please, let's take action. Even one small step can mean a lot for us because we are tired of all these conferences. I mean, we are grateful, but at the same time, we are tired of not seeing any results. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I will turn to our two panelists who are joining us remotely. Ms. Hima Ghani, please.
Hi, good afternoon. Very good to see all of you, particularly in the name of Afghan women in Afghanistan at very hard times. You already heard from our other colleagues that, the situation is getting worse, particularly with the internal conflict starting, with ISIS becoming even more active because, the current authority is not really well organized. But there are some facts that we need to agree to and understand. And I think, those of you that know Afghanistan, you already know what's going on or what happened the last 20 years plus. For those that are not, 100% familiar, I think, some of our previous speakers touched on the fact that we didn't really have a perfect government the last 20 years, but it was kind of, democratic governance. Okay, elections had their problems within the parliament as well as within, the government. Political parties sort of were not as active as they were, in the sense that they are active in the West, particularly European countries. But there was a system and it was being built and there was hope. People were becoming hopeful for the future, particularly that, the majority of the country is under the age of 30. 75% of the population of Afghanistan is very young. And, the oppression of authorities such as Taliban means that the children and youth are being oppressed. I think it was Fawzia Jan earlier mentioned that, women are under arrest. That's, on the 5th of May, one of the decrees of Taliban that was advising an additional veil. We were already, veiled and did the hijab and everything, much better than Saudi Arabia and Iran and everywhere else, all the other Muslim countries that you can imagine. But still they said, okay, cover up your face and hair and everything else. But it's very interesting that there's also a point, saying, and do not leave the house if it's not really essential. What is essential is being decided by an authority that isn't even able to form a government. There is no government currently in the country, as you all know. Nobody's seen the head of the authority, who's supposed to be living somewhere in Kandahar. The two big factions are not actually, working together and talking to each other. The Pakistani-backed Haqqani group on one side and the Kandahari groups are not talking to each other. They have their own internal issues, and that's why they're not able to come up with policies. Every time, we go to the government for certain questions on certain sectors, they tell us that, oh, we haven't formed a policy yet. It's after 10, 11 months, they still don't know how to rule the country. The police only was formed very recently, a few weeks back, and that was with very minimal training. So people don't even have the security. If something happens to them, they don't know who to go and where to go to. That's why, a lot of people prefer to stay at home. Domestic violence has, as mentioned before, has raised, it's increased massively because men are also at home. It's not just women. Men are being oppressed by, intimidation on the streets. That, in fact, is to both men and women. I visit Afghanistan. I have a, dual citizenship and I'm able to visit Afghanistan. I've been there twice. And every time I go there, at least within a week, once or twice, my vehicle stopped and I'm not driving. Of course, somebody else is driving, asking, who is this woman and where is she going? The fighters on the street do not even bother talking to me. I'm not, seen as a human being to be respected and to talk to. They talk to the driver because it's a male a driver. And then they ask the relationship. What is our relationship? Women are only working in certain NGOs. And even that, as I was saying earlier, because there isn't a proper governance system, that is different rules in different locations. In Balkh, in the north of Afghanistan, for example, women are advised that, okay, you can work in NGOs and humanitarian areas, but a man has to take you to the office and in the evening pick you up. That means like a chaperone, like a mahram. In Herat, recently, the deputy governor announced to the NGO I'm supporting that, you know, a man has to take the woman to the office and then sit there until the end of the day. So this man, I suppose, shouldn't be doing another job just to be chaperoning this woman that wants to work in an NGO. So the rules are different from location to location. That creates trouble. That makes it even more difficult for the youth, for women and men to understand what rule to follow, who to follow, which group to follow. I think overall, you know, other than, you know, the normal hardships that you're all aware, and the human rights that's being affected, I think we should understand that, you know, more than anything, a government that's not able to talk to each other and agree on things, they cannot provide services. We don't have education services, we don't have health services in the country. Some clinics are open, but there's no monitoring. Nobody's checking on who's doing what. There's no medication. People are complaining. The conservative men in Afghanistan have been encouraged. And we do have to admit that we do have a conservative population. Not everybody, but there are families that, you know, prefer women to stay at home. It has encouraged them to tell their wives and daughters and sisters to stay at home. And domestic violence, as I said earlier, has increased. And as a result, the suicide rates have increased. And usually the suicides are amongst young men and young women because they cannot put up with the situation and they see the international community forgetting them. We know you haven't forgotten them. We understand that, but that has to be communicated inside the country. They have to see that the international community is doing something. Maybe, you know, it's for the civil society, for the academics to get involved and push their governments a little. Because the political side of most Western governments, unfortunately, are not as active as they should be. We do not encourage recognition of Taliban, but we encourage engagement. Unless you engage at the high level, at the top level, nothing will change inside the country. That has to be understood. There's a misunderstanding that people are saying, well, if we talk to them, then they will see it as a sign of recognition. No, I think, you know, it's very obvious. We have to put pressure. We have to ask the Islamic countries who've been rather quiet to try to get engaged. We've heard a lot of Shura ulama, the councils of ulama in some other countries making statements in terms of advising Taliban what to do. But unfortunately, the political side of the governments, again, are very quiet. Thank you very much. I understand that there's going to be more talks later in terms of recommendations.
Thank you. And our last speaker, Dr. Alia Yilmaz.
تشکر بسیار زیاد از دایر کنندگان برنامه. ما هم میخوایم چند مورد را که دوستا اشاره کردن با تایید حرفای از اونا در مورد وضعیت زنان افغانستان و در کل وضعیت انسان در افغانستان باید بحث کنیم. امروز کاری میفهمم که در بدترین شرایط در افغانستان وضعیت حقوق بشری قرار داره و فکر میکنم که زنای افغان بازم در نقطه رسیدن که به خاطر تهدابی ترین حقشان مجادله میدن. امروز وقتی ما بحث میکنیم که در افغانستان گرسنگی جریان داره، البته از نظر اجتماعی متضررترین قشر جامعه زنها هستند. یا وقتی که از مسائل اقتصادی در افغانستان بحث میکنیم، از نگاه نبود امکانات حتی صحی محرومترین قشر زنهای افغانستان هستند. امروز اگر از مهاجرت بحث میکنیم، باز هم بیشترین مهاجر زنها تشکیل میدن. ما میخوایم گفته های خود در چارچوبه چند سوال خلاصه کنم که چرا ما امروز باز هم سر تهدابی ترین حق خود چانه میزنیم. آیا از نگاه حقوق بشری کارهایی که در افغانستان صورت گرفته بود چی باعث شد که به جای نرسید و امروز دوباره آمدیم به پیرامید ماسلو اگر نظر بیاندازیم در تداوی ترین نقطه حقوق بشری ما چانه میزنیم. مشکل اصلی که در افغانستان به نظر ما وجود داره امروز مشکل تضاد عنعنه و تجدد ما میتونیم که بگوییم. اگر در قسمت وضعیت امروزی باز هم یک تجدید نظر بکنیم، مثلا طالبا وقتی که قانون مطرح میکنن بر علیه زنان، مسائل را که مطرح میکنن از نگاه فرهنگی و دینی را به بررسی میگیرن. به نظر ما این مسئله است که در افغانستان درونکوبی نشده و زنان که در قسمت امروز به اصطلاح در سطح مرکزی مورد مطالعه قرار میگیرن فرق میکنه تا زنانی که در روستاها زندگی میکنن. هر دوتا را به نظر من باید که خط قرمزی که وجود داره ای به بررسی گرفته شود. امروز میبینیم که در قانون طالبانی، قانونی که طالبان مطرح میکنه برای زنان در او مثل یک سوژه بازم جای میگیره. یا مثلا از نگاه فرهنگی، از بود فرهنگی زنان در افغانستان مطالعه کنین، هنوز بحث از این جریان داره که آیا زن واقعا در رده انسان بودن قرار داره یا خیر. یعنی هنوز به این معنی که زنا از منظر کلان جامعه سوژه هستن. مثلا به بد دادن زنان در افغانستان میتونه که یک مثال بارز از این باشه. باز هم از بود تجدد اگر در افغانستان ببینیم، کارهایی که در قسمت توانمندسازی زنان صورت گرفت به نظر من مثل یک کشتی تیتانیک میماند. فرمولایی را که ما در اینجا ترانسفر کرده بودیم و میخواستیم که تحقق پیدا کنه، البته همه جانبه سنجیده نشده بود. امروز وقتی که ما کشتی غرق میشه و اونو تیقایی که در کشتی وجود داشت ما نمیتونیم که از اون قسم استفاده کنیم، به اصطلاح امی بر ما آموخته نشده بود که در حالت اضطراری چطور میتونه زنا از او اندوخته های خودش که در طول 20 سال امروز ما ادعا میکنیم، البته که اندوخته های هم داشتیم. امروز زنایی که مثلا شما در سطوح بالا میبینین اینجا بعضیشون تشریف دارن، اینا به اصطلاح حاصل 20 سال دوره قبلی بودن، ولی وقتی که در یک شرایط اضطراری قرار گرفتیم ما نفهمیدیم که از این امکانات کمی که روی دست داریم چه قسم استفاده کنیم. ما بازم میخوایم که سوال اولی را مطرح کنم. وقتی که زن به عنوان سوژه امروز به عنوان یک چیز مطرح میشه، علت از این چی است؟ آیا کدام مرکز تحقیقی ما داریم که در مورد مشکلات اصلی زنا به اصطلاح ما بتونیم که از منظر خود زن افغان ببینیم به زنای افغان؟ به نظر من چیزایی که ما ضرورت داریم مشکلات اصلی و اساسی اما بیخ حرفا را باید مطرح کنیم. به نظر من خیلی از گفته های دوستا البته که حقیقت دارم و به تایید تمام حرفایی که اونا گفتن دوباره مطرح میکنم که ما نباید امروز جدای از بقیه زنای دنیا فقط سر حقوق تهدابی ما که عبارت از سیر کردن شکم ما باشه، عبارت از رفتن به مکتب و حق پوشش ما باشه بحث داشته باشیم. بحثای کلانتر را که اصلا نمیتونیم به بررسی بگیریم. من فکر میکنم در لاورای برنامه دیگه سوالاتی هم وجود داره. فعلا تمام مقدر است. تشکر.
All of the speakers. I would like to turn now to our UN independent experts who have joined us today to ask, in the context of your own mandates and in the work that you are doing, what steps have you taken to address the human rights situation of women and girls in Afghanistan? And if you could also shed light on what steps, what further steps are needed to show solidarity, engage in constructive dialogue, and to promote accountability for violations. I'd like to start first with Mary Lola.
Thank you very, very much for having me today and having to listen to all these harrowing stories and getting to understand more about the harrowing situation that you all find yourselves in Afghanistan is always very difficult. As you know, my mandate is the situation of human rights defenders, and women human rights defenders have been a priority for my mandate since I started in 2020 because of the additional challenges they face because of their gender and because they have to, the challenges they have to overcome when standing up for the rights of others. And these challenges, I've been to Afghanistan, these challenges and risks were there even before August, but the situation, of course, has become so much more dire. The way I've been trying to help is to keep in touch with defenders on the ground since last August, actually before that, and the experiences they have shared with me have detailed the extremely oppressive environment for women human rights defenders in the country. It's an environment that has been purposefully built by the de facto authorities. They have constructed through draconian decrees, arbitrary arrest, incommunicado detention, torture, house searches, and threats. And in response to this, human rights defenders have told me they have to change the way they work. The space for their activities, as we've all heard and as we know, and they've told me, has deteriorated drastically. Many of them have been forced to seek international protection. And in both situations, they have needed and will continue to need support from the international community and allies. However, though there have been a few exceptions, this support has, for the most part, not been forthcoming so far. And I know that myself through the efforts I have made. And it has to change. It's long past time for those who say they standing in solidarity with Afghan women and Afghan women human rights defenders to provide the committed, coordinated support that is needed. And that's the key message that I want to say today to whoever is listening.
Turn to Melissa. Do you hear me, Melissa?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here. Inviting me to this event and really echo Mary just said about.
You're not able to hear you so well. The connection is a bit choppy.
Let me.
No, I'm sorry. Could you turn to first maybe Ms. Bandanarana and then come back to you? Would that be all right? Okay. No. Hello?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, it's better.
Okay, thank you, and I apologize for that. I just wanted to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me to this event, and just really after having listened to everything that has been shared, I just want to really start by expressing my solidarity as well and my very deep empathy, but also outrage, right? I think that is something that we all share as well. The outrage for this situation and for how long it's been going on, and the fact that it was foreseeable. This is not a surprise to many, but of course the question is, what can we do next? Before getting into that, since you asked me, Pooja, about what the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls has been doing, I'd like to highlight a few things that we've done within the scope of our mandate, which includes leading and joining statements, including immediately after the takeover, calling for the protection of human rights and prevention of civilian slaughter. We issued a strong statement denouncing the exclusion of women from political and public life and the dismantling of key institutions. And these were followed by others on participation in sports, access to education, as well as opposing funds being sent to the Taliban. And we know that these statements are often read by member states and UN officials, and they have been used by civil society to denounce violations. We've also engaged in dialogue and diplomacy with member states on an ongoing basis. We have participated in informal briefings organized by permanent missions in New York, emphasizing the centrality of women's and girls' human rights and reminding member states of their obligations under international law to prevent atrocities and mitigate harm, including any form of gender apartheid. In almost every meeting that I have had with a permanent mission or a high-level UN official in Geneva, as well as in New York, I have conveyed that the situation of Afghanistan is a major concern and priority for the mandate. And during our interactive dialogue with member states in June on our thematic report, which focuses on girls and young women's participation in political and public life, we wholeheartedly supported and amplified the call for an urgent debate. We've also engaged in dialogue with Afghan women. We've been hearing from them over the course of the last several months, virtually, of course, for the most part. And what we hear from them is what we convey to member states and officials of the UN to remind them of their obligations and ensure that they do not neglect Afghanistan and see the situation as impossible to address. And this also includes providing constructive feedback to member states as well as to UN agencies on perceived missteps, because there have been a few. We've also engaged in dialogue with other concerned mandate holders, and because we know that in order to be effective in sustaining international interest in Afghanistan and promoting accountability, mandate holders must also coordinate and streamline their efforts. So we've been in regular dialogue with the Special Rapporteur in Afghanistan and other mandate holders. Now, our approaches may vary at times, but we all agree that what we're seeing happen to women and girls in Afghanistan, as well as minorities, is an extreme form of patriarchal violence that must not be tolerated or condoned. So in that regard, many of us are indeed on the same page. So Pooja, would you like me to talk a bit about what may happen next, or should I comment on that later? Okay. So as a mandate, we do plan to coordinate, continue to work closely with the Special Rapporteur in Afghanistan, because now there's there's a dedicated mandate. It's really important for us to coordinate and streamline our efforts. We must continue to receive information from Afghan women about their concerns and perspectives and insights and their aspirations. I think this has to be the basis of our work and what we say, as well as international human rights law. We anchor all of our recommendations and messages in that. And I would request that if we could have a clearer sense of the political agenda of Afghan women and what kind of role you want to play, it would be really a simple task for us to amplify this vision and to support your agenda. What measures do you want to see taken against the Taliban, aside from a travel ban and freezing of interests? Is there anything else? Because our role is really to support and enable and amplify. We don't want to speak for you, but we want to speak with you and fully support your efforts. We will continue to issue statements, because that's something that we normally do. And these statements can help put pressure on the de facto authorities, also emphasizing their obligations and those of other actors, including UNAMA, under international law, because international law applies to all. We will continue to brief and have bilateral conversations with member states about their obligations, and also provide updates as well as our own analysis and recommendations. And again, when there are missteps by governments and even UN agencies with detrimental consequences for women, because oftentimes there are unforeseen detrimental consequences, we will call them out. We've repeatedly emphasized that the oppression and exclusion of women is the central issue that must not be compromised or sidelined by the international community and UN actors. There is no doubt that it is being used as a strategy by the de facto authorities to consolidate their power, and it is a central component of the reign of terror that they have unleashed on Afghans as a whole. So we'll continue to use our voice to prevent any attempt to diminish the significance of this travesty or allow women's rights to be traded off, because we believe and we agree with you that there cannot be peace or justice in Afghanistan without full respect for women's rights. The Taliban's illegal rule and the injustices flowing from it, including the dehumanization of women and girls, must end. So we'll do whatever we can to help women and girls restore their rights and agency back, and also their rightful place in Afghan society. I just do want to add that we have been advocating for a stronger role for women and those belonging to minorities in the management and distribution of humanitarian aid, because there has been a crisis, and there's an even larger one looming, and also called for stronger engagement with women human rights defenders. Mary also spoke about that, and that is also something that we have been focusing on. So back to you, Pooja. Thank you.
Many thanks to you. And Ms. Bandarana.
Thank you, Pooja. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and most importantly, the powerful ladies, we heard the representation of diverse women, your voices. I want to let you know that we stand in solidarity with you together, and we need to fight this together. In terms of, you have asked me what has CEDAW been doing, I would like to inform you that when we had our first physical dialogue, constructive dialogue, just before August 15, when it was the last physical constructive dialogue before COVID, which was March 2020, we had a constructive dialogue with Afghanistan then. And as the rapporteur for the Afghanistan, I remember that dialogue very well, and the hopes that the women who had represented in the dialogue, in the constructive dialogue, felt, but at the same time, they did share some concerns about what the future of Afghanistan would be like. So within 3 months, the situation changed, as we all know. So since then, what have we been doing within our mandate is when we met physically in October after the COVID, that was in 2021, we assessed the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan. And within our mandate, we formed a special task force. We continue to work as a special task force on Afghanistan within the committee. And I do recall one of the speaker today, Fauzia Kufi, we invited her during that time as she was in Geneva to her session, and we listened to her as well. We listened to her, her sharing, which gave us a more deeper insight into what the situation was like. And we decided very strongly that within our mandate, we should ask for an exceptional report to the de facto authorities on Afghanistan. And it was in November 2021 that we decided to seek for an exceptional report. However, the exceptional report asks for the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan, the access to protection, the remedies available, the lifting the restriction on their movement, expression, assembly, education, and their right to participate in political and public life. However, the letter requesting the exceptional report was delivered to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the de facto authorities, through UNAMA only in January 2022. But since then, I want to share over here that the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, Reem Al-Salem, and myself went to Afghanistan on an unofficial technical visit in April. It was a 5-day visit. It was coordinated by UNAMA, and the purpose was to assess the situation of women and girls firsthand. And I think we were the de facto authorities, the human rights defenders, the women activists, as well as some women working in NGOs, UN agencies, some spaces, safe spaces also that we visited. And the stories coming out over there, although it makes a difference when you are there on the ground and interact firsthand, directly with the different stakeholders. But as the Human Rights Commissioner has said, as many of you have outlined, we also found the same, that there is no uniform policy throughout Afghanistan. Situations vary from place to place. Negotiations takes place every day in different formats. In some places, some women have been allowed to go to work, but there are certain level of restrictions as well. In some places, they are completely not allowed to go to work. Our conversation with these different stakeholders revolved around the right to education, the right to political and public life, of participation of women, and access to justice. These were the basic things that we talked about. When we talked to the human rights defenders, one of their strong concern or wish was that it is them who need to negotiate, it is them who will find the solution to this, and that they need to be capacitated and provided with adequate platforms and networks to see how they can leverage their voice or amplify their voice to to be able to negotiate for their own security and human rights. So that was, voiced very, very strongly during our meeting. But the rest of them, as we did find some safe spaces that were functioning well, though it was called family spaces, but that was the only entry point where gender-based violence could be seen or could be addressed, though the access to justice was completely not there, but at least women could meet in those places and share their concerns. So these were some of the, very shortly, very briefly, some of the findings, but I think most of the findings or most of the situation, the strong women have already identified here, and we shared those as well. So in the meantime, we have been continuing to interact with different women networks and women of Afghanistan, and I'm glad that this very, very timely dialogue has been organized today because the women were seeking platforms, and I think this is one of the entry points to do that as well. In terms of, let me see. One of the wish expressed by the Afghan women activists that we met was that the international community helped to increase women's participation in political discussions, including international fora, and to amplify the diversity of Afghan women's voices therein. The importance to provide platforms for Afghan women and to build capacity of a diverse range of women, including women from rural areas and young women, that was strongly pointed out. As what should be done ahead, I think, just a second, you want me to, I think we need to continue to dialogue to some extent with the de facto authorities. We have been debriefing and collaborating with the Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan, Richard Bennett, as well as we debriefed many UN agencies, including the Deputy Secretary General and other UN agencies on visit to Afghanistan. And
sorry, I think we may have lost you, Ms. Rana, as well, because the connection got a. I think we will have to move on, Ms. Rana. I'm sorry, we don't hear you anymore. I would like to take this opportunity now just to hear from people in the room. If there was anybody who would like to take the floor to put forward any comments or any questions. Yeah.
If I have no chance anymore.
We have about half an hour left. We have a hard stop at 1:45.
Okay, so no, I'll maybe 2 minutes.
Absolutely. Are there any other comments or questions from this one? Yes.
Everybody, my name is Maria Jesus Conde. I am the ambassador at large for the feminist foreign policy of Spain, and I'm very happy to be here with my friends, these Afghan, very powerful ladies. I have been very lucky. I mean, I'm going to talk first of all personally. Joined you in several meetings, and I don't know what more you have to say to pay attention to you. I mean, but this is my personal view and my sympathy with you. But here I am to reiterate the commitment and solidarity of the government of Spain with the freedom and human rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. We are going to continue supporting all the initiatives at the multilateral level, regional and bilateral level also. 4 days after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, we organized a meeting in Madrid, Hear Us, to listen the voices of the Afghan women. We wanted to hear how you see the solution, the lasting solutions, democratic solutions for Afghanistan with the support of the international community. How could you engage in the peace building processes? Last Monday, on the margins of the NATO summit, we organized another meeting in Madrid, and in spite of the fact that we are very concerned and touched by the situation of Ukraine, we invited Fausia Coffee, to hear the voices of the Afghan women in this forum, because we cannot forget you, even when we are talking about women, peace and security. So I would like just to finish saying that Spain stands with you, and we are going to continue supporting all your efforts, reaching for this lasting democratic solution under the international law with the support of women and men. Thank you very much.
I take maybe 2 more comments or questions, and if you could introduce yourself as well, that would be great.
Thank you very much. My name is Zora Shafiq, and I have a question here to say. I would like to thank everyone who is giving a word, giving a promise to Afghanistan women. But I have just one question. We usually work with timelines, and we know very well that when you set a timeline and you work towards it, it's achievable. In Afghanistan, unfortunately, it's almost 1 year that the situation has changed for women. And despite all statements, despite all activities that have been taken on to engage in this issue, we don't see any, I would say, any positive changes on the ground. My question would be that since the situation actually changes very rapidly for women in Afghanistan, and I have seen a book which was released by one of the Taliban elders who says that each woman who goes out of her house, she will be buried. So it means that they push further pressure on women in Afghanistan to stay at home. So despite all the statements, despite all the movements that we hear and we see in the Western countries, there is no positive change on the ground. Until when? I would like to ask the UN, UNAMA, other countries who support Afghan women. We know that the situation is very dear in Afghanistan. So until when? Is there any timeline that we should wait for? Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm Barbara Fontana. I'm from the Permission of Switzerland, and I just wanted to say how important it was for Switzerland to be here. We thank all the panelists online, offline, for their insightful interventions. We want to particularly thank the activists who have shared so openly with us today a deeply disturbing reality. What we fear the most is that the systematic curtailment of Afghan women and girls' fundamental rights and freedoms will result into a normalization of discriminatory gender norms, relations, and structures. And it is also clear that addressing women's freedom of movement is an important component to overcoming broader challenges and a condition for the exercise of their human rights. In particular, obviously, the right to education, as well as participation in public and political life. Of course, we will do what we can to call on the de facto authorities to protect all Afghans and their human rights. Despite the dire circumstances, we still encourage women and girls in Afghanistan to remain active agents of change, to continue defending their rights. And we are convinced that the future of Afghanistan, as of any country, can only be built if women's voices are heard and listened to. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, all panelists, for your insights. I want to just ask this prominent Afghan women rights activists that we have present and some in the online. What do you think, what should be the response of international community with the situation we're facing right now? It has been since 15 of August 2021, almost a year. what's your expectation really as a women rights activist? What should we do here in Geneva? What we can do, and the international community as a whole? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would the panelists like to respond to the questions and comments? Perhaps we can start with you and
And this is like the last intervention, right?
Yes, we have 15 minutes left. Yes.
No, I just wanted to thank everybody who supported us in these difficult times. We have a say that, no matter how good somebody will do with you, but when they do a good thing in your difficult times, you will remember that. So these are like our very difficult times of our life. I can't even imagine that in a month time, it will be 1 year since everything went back to scratch. And 1 year of education being banned to our girls will have hundreds, if not hundreds, decades of impact on the situation of Afghanistan and the girls. I would have never expected last year this time that things will go back to scratch in a way that there is no hope, and the Taliban have become more repressive. My hope was that they will keep their promises of all these rosy statements that they were making during the negotiation in terms of women's rights, but in reality they have not kept their promises. So that means that they are not sincere in everything that they say. And my worry is that even when they say that they have disaffiliated themselves with the rest of military extremist groups, probably this is also not sincere, because if they are not keeping one of their promise, which is respect to the rights and inclusivity and diversity of Afghanistan, means that they will not be serious and sincere in their other promises. So my worry is that, as Ms. Barakzai mentioned, that before the Taliban takeover, there were 18 military extremist groups that were working between Afghanistan, Pakistan, Central Asia. This situation of Afghanistan is going to even further infiltrate those military extremists to enjoy their movements and mobilities, and it's going to endanger, especially in the situation of the Central Asia and Ukraine, the security in Ukraine is going to even further endanger. I assume, I don't want to say it, but your own security. So I think it's not just about women's rights in Afghanistan. It has a direct connection to your own securities in your own borders. So please use whatever you can. Of course, girls' education is important. Women back to work is important, because it's very basic rights, right? To go in 21st century, after all the progress we have made, to go back and ask for basic, which is girls' education and women's to work. I feel bad for myself, but this is basic. I mean, but even if the Taliban allow that girls to go to school, that does not mean the situation is ready, because there should be a government that is accountable to the people. Accountable to international commitments that Afghanistan has committed itself. The CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, every convention that we have committed ourselves to and been signed, they need to be accountable to that. But I know that from my negotiation, they were very sensitive when we were mentioning the international conventions. I know that, just as a last statement, I know that many countries in the world would like to see the situation as it is normal, because they don't want to see another crisis coming up from Afghanistan. But let's remember that, if women in that part of the world are oppressed to hell, they literally cannot even breathe. They are asked to stay home. And as Ms. Ghani said, if they leave the house, they need to, their Taliban favorite hijab is burqa. It's like controlling their mind, their innovation, their thinking, everything that the woman has is not normal. Let's be honest to ourselves. It's not normal. Now the question is, what can you do? I mean, I think you need to, in your humanitarian interventions, you need to make 50% women participation obligatory. You need to tell them that, yes, you will take humanitarian aid. We are grateful for that, because people of Afghanistan need that. Unfortunately, we are a rich country in natural resources, poor country in reality. So if you take humanitarian aid, it has to be 50% to the women of Afghanistan, not only as beneficiaries, but also as decision makers. This is the first thing. The second thing is, I think we have always been extreme. We have fought with Taliban. You have fought with Taliban through NATO and member states, right? And then all of a sudden, you went to another extreme. You allow Taliban to exercise their political rights, open the office for them, etc., etc. So there has not been a middle ground pressure on Taliban, a political pressure on Taliban. So from fighting, all of a sudden, they went to become your partners. You signed an agreement with them, and you said, well, they're okay, there is Taliban 2.0, and we tend to believe that narrative that was created for Taliban. But in reality, we know it's not true. That narrative is not true. So I think, I think we have to really reconsider the narratives we have created for them. And I think the last recommendation would be the same space that was given to Taliban in terms of office, in terms of their travel, although they were under travel ban. The travel ban was lifted because we wanted them to meaningfully engage in negotiations, right? They did not engage in negotiations. They were just buying time, killing time, expediting their war on the ground, killing our people. So I think that the same level of luxury that Taliban had in terms of their political space, etc., please give that the same level to the woman, to the people of Afghanistan. We have our women in Pakistan, Iran, Tajikistan, inside Afghanistan, they have difficulty getting into the European countries, extreme difficult situation, but Taliban give private jets that bring them to European capitals. So I think sometimes people keep asking questions about the double standard. Like in Oslo, there was a meeting where Taliban were actually brought by private jets. And the question women in Afghanistan ask me and all of us every day. I don't even want to open their messages because some of the messages are really painful. They tell me, what happened? These people are taking the private jets and I don't get a visa for Pakistan. And if I go to Pakistan, I don't get a visa even if so I think we need to really work together. We have a long way. I have been repeating this and I want to repeat again. Discrimination in Afghanistan is not normal. It can reach to your own borders. So work with us, as somebody said, work with us to bring constitutional order in Afghanistan and restore women's rights.
Thank you. Thank you. And just and just as a reminder, if we can just stick to about 2 minutes for the intervention.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to be very short because Ms. Kufi actually told everything. So I agree with her fully. But there is something that I want to add. Afghanistan is still signatory to 7 out of 9 human rights conventions. Mm-hmm. I think we have to take Taliban accountable for that, for implementation of that. I think the only way for now to go through is pushing them to accept all the values which is reflected in that document and also to report on that. And also what is going on in Afghanistan is for some people, for some women, actually is becoming a normal life, which is frightening for me personally. And now when I call and ask my relatives, what are you doing? They say, okay, everything is fine. We are at home. they don't have work. They don't go to school. They don't do anything. They don't have income. So that is the situation now. That is normal. If it becomes normal, we would not have those group of women anymore to go out on the street and to demonstrate against all the banning coming from the Taliban. I think that is very important. It's very critical time for all of us to pay attention to this point and also keep supporting those women who are in Afghanistan. And also we are also, it is for us, it's very dangerous to talk very clearly, very directly, against Taliban because we have relatives, families in Afghanistan, and also we cannot travel to Afghanistan. But we are talking actually about the truth. It is reality. We are telling about reality, but that is something that Taliban doesn't like. And another thing is that Taliban is really not representing Afghan people. Shukriya Jan explained it very well. Even they are coming from one ethnic community, even they are not representing the whole Pashtun ethnicity in Afghanistan. And they are against other ethnicities like Uzbek, Tajiks, Azaras, and those who are, and also Pashtuns, I told in advance. Those Tajiks and Hazaras were in the resisting forces, so of course they are in fighting. But even other Tajiks, innocent Tajiks are being punished, jailed by them because they are coming from those provinces. So that is very dangerous in terms of human rights values and needs to be considered. And also Taliban should be, but by other countries like Norway and European countries, they should be very careful in supporting Taliban. Because they are actually upholding human rights values and at the end of the day supporting Taliban groups. That is something that we don't expect and we don't wish to double standard, as rightly mentioned by Fawzi Kufi. The situation is very critical. So sympathy is good. Thank you so much for showing sympathy, but now it is the time for action. We have to take something because Taliban is really not the only option for Afghanistan. We have better options. We have to identify. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll try to be just in 2 minutes. 2 minutes is a lot to talk about what we should do for Afghanistan. I'm asking you, and I hope this message will be delivered largely. First of all, sanction on Taliban, at least minimum travel sanction, not only on 2 or 3 people, all the Taliban government. They should feel what women in Afghanistan can feel. We cannot go outside of our house without a male company. So let them stay and stick in Afghanistan. Second, putting condition on humanitarian aid. As you're all aware, the women of Afghanistan was been eliminated from the job. So it's time for them, a condition. If Taliban are willing to receive humanitarian aid, 30%, the minimum number of international or local organization must be women. And the beneficiary, at least 50% of those humanitarian aids. That it must be one of the conditions. Third, from my understanding, as far as I know, my family background, my grandpa was from Kandahar, a very great religious scholar. My 85 years old mom, she is alive, she was a teacher. So now you can understand the culture issue. She had a better life than I. She had a better education than I had. She had a better time in Afghanistan than I could imagine. I'm also grandma, but she's the kind of grandma that she could say she's proud about her daughter and her grandchildren. But I don't know what will be the situation in life with my younger daughters. Not only my biological one, but those whom they are in Afghanistan. Because in the last 11 months, it's not only 11 months. It was a backward 20 years and more and more and more. My colleague says about the domestic violence been increased. I'm also talking about the mental health. So please add that one also whenever you're trying to send anything. Do you remember the lockdown time in Europe, in your country? Everybody was exaggerated. It was a frustration. If you like the people of Afghanistan, particularly in Afghanistan, to be under lockdown, lifetime lockdown, do nothing. But if you want to release them from a lockdown, you want them to breathe oxygen, please take step and use your legal power. Interfere politically as a United Nation in Afghanistan. You have the full rights according to your mandate. You have the full authority to take any decision on behalf of the Afghan people according to international law. Choice is yours. Would you like us to be on lockdown or free? Thank you.
Thank you.
Question, I only want to add 3 points. One, we think that for the last 11 months, the international community wasn't so clear. they had a lot of meeting with Taliban. Sometimes Taliban misuse from their meeting and use as a stage for themselves. So I think the message of the international community should be more clear. They should say that if you don't accept the condition, and if you don't accept the women's rights and human rights, so there is no legitimacy for you. I think in this 10 months, there is no clear message from international community, as we know. The number two is the most important question of Afghanistan is that international community, sometimes Taliban go and discuss with the international community in the meeting that there are enough security in Afghanistan and we change the security, the situation in Afghanistan. Our expectation is that please see the reality of Afghanistan. Taliban is not the only one reality in Afghanistan. We know that why there are security, because before that, before 15 August, they sent bomb explosion and now they are in the power. And the other thing is that this is like a graveyard piece in Afghanistan. When you go in a graveyard, there is no voices because the people cannot go and raise their voice. In Afghanistan, when you raise their voice, you will be tortured. That is why there is a peace, there is a silence situation. So the expectation is that please see the reality of Afghanistan. The reality of Afghanistan is 35 million people who live there and cannot raise their voice. The reality is that half of population are ignored. The reality is that there are ethnicity groups and they are ignored totally. So the first thing is that international community said Taliban will change. When they will change? So the reality, we should consider the reality. The number third is that you know that they are put themselves behind the humanitarian crisis. They want to misuse from the situation. If Taliban are responsible or accountable, why they put themselves beside of humanitarian crisis and beside of the civil rights? As a government, they should respond to people, but they put themselves, international community accept our legitimacy, and then we give our citizens right. It is not the philosophy of a government. That is why I think the humanitarian assistance shouldn't be in those mechanisms that strengthen the government of Taliban. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will just add a few words because everything was mentioned. I would come as the young generation perspective, even though I'm not young, I have 3 kids, but I'm still considered young. But Taliban are not only silencing women inside the country, they are silencing us through our families, through putting pressure on our family, through torturing our family members. You may have remembered the video confession of women protesters, which erupted, and you can hear my name there because I was in contact with them, and with the Spain government, we were trying to evacuate as many of them as possible. And at that time, when my name came out, the first thing they did, they went and took every position I had, my properties, my cars, my showroom, everything. And then they went after my family. They took my brother, they tortured him for 3 days and nights straight. And my brother is a mentally unfit person. And when they realized that he's not mentally stable and he's not useful to them, so they let him go with a permanent damage to his brain. Now, my mother has been hiding since 11 months, but that doesn't keep me silent. If you're willing to sacrifice our family, if you're willing to take that risk, why can't you do that while you have the power, while you can do it? I'm talking about my mother, my brother. If I am ready to sacrifice them to be the voice of women in Afghanistan, you have the money, you have the power, you have the authority. You can do it. It's not very hard. Just listen to what we are saying and take your further step. As Madam Maria said that they want to be with our voice. I mean, they're not trying to be our voice, they're trying to support our voice, right? So each one of us here are giving our ideas, like Madam Kofi said, which points you should be pressuring, like other sisters said. I would also say that because I have been involved also in creating livelihood with one of the NGOs on the ground, and they're also fighting child marriages. And do you know that the number, the rising number of girl child which are being sold, it's devastating. This is another point that we cannot see and we are not able to see because people are starving. They're selling their daughters below 10 years and they're selling these kids for marriage. And there's a lot of pedophiles in Afghanistan who would happily buy these kids for $300, $400. This is what the value of life in a girl's life in Afghanistan is. How long do you need to decide that you have to intervene? It's 1 year, and for us, it feels like 3 decades. Don't let this chance to slide like this simply. In Afghanistan, you cannot register any NGO under a woman's name anymore. A woman's name would not be a title or a title of an NGO cannot, non-profit organization or any organization cannot represent a woman. What else do we need? Just go and check our media. Just look at our journalist sisters. They're suffering, they're fighting, resisting with the face mask they're presenting because they don't want to be eliminated. But how long? How long they will be able to survive? It's not COVID. COVID is done, but in Afghanistan, as Ms. Barekzai said, it's a permanent lockdown for women. And it's not only women, it's the young generation, the men. Because these young generation, our boys are also quite educated. They have tasted freedom. They have tasted how it's like to be in an education center with the girls studying.
I'm going to have to cut it off there. We're already over time, and thank you very much. I really, we all really appreciate that you have made the time to join us here today and to speak with all of us. For me, the main takeaway that I have is that the measure of our solidarity will be judged on our action. And thank you for holding us accountable. Thank you for coming and talking to us about, judging us on our deeds, and the time for words is enough. And with this, I would like to invite, I believe, the Ambassador of Australia to close this panel here today.
Well, thank you very much. Firstly, can I thank thank you very much, Pooja. And let me thank, firstly, the Ambassador of Afghanistan and his team for their unstinting efforts to ensure the voices of Afghan women and girls are amplified and heard. And I would also like to thank Spain, Ambassador at Large for feminist foreign policy. I think we all want and need one of those. And the other sponsors, Switzerland and others who are here today. I think, I would like to extend my very sincere thanks to all of you on the panel. I understand that, you are tired, you are sick of speaking, you are weary of words, but I want to say, don't stop speaking. We need to hear your messages. You need to maintain your rage so that we can maintain our rage as well. So please don't stop, even though I understand you feel like you are banging your heads against a brick wall. I'd also like to say thank you to the mandate holders and CEDAW committee member who spoke to us as well. I think here in Geneva, we can be very frustrated by the sea of words that we deal with every day. But as I think you have pointed out, that Afghanistan is still party to a range of human rights treaties. We have the urgent debate taking place tomorrow. We need to do all we can here to ensure that your voices are heard, that they're on the agenda, that we are continuing to put our attention on what's happening in your country. I don't have any good words of my own, but I would like to just read a quote from one of my foreign affairs colleagues, a diplomat called Fred Smith, who served a number of times in Afghanistan when Australia had a presence on the ground there. We don't anymore. And this is from a song called Dust of Uruzgan. And it's about how the dust gets into everything in Uruzgan, where he spent a lot of time. I'll just read a couple of verses because it speaks more than I can. It says, "Still the people are gracious and they're courteous and smart. And when the children look into your eyes, they walk into your heart. Face each day with courage and each year without a plan, beyond scratching for survival in the dust of Uruzgan. But the Taliban are ruthless, keep the people terrorized with roadside bombs and hangings and leaving letters in the night. And they have no useful vision for the children of this land, but to keep them praying on their knees in the dust of Uruzgan." I think that says it all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, and with that, we have closed our panel. Thank you all for being here today with us.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you.